I don't think I ever really felt guilt until I became a mum. When I was at work, I was thinking about the kids. When I was with the kids, I was thinking about work. I felt that I couldn't be a good mum and have an amazing career. I honestly cannot afford to fuck around, and I'm not prepared to invest my time in anything that I don't value. I don't want to wait to do all the things that I want to do until I'm almost dead. I very tangibly and profoundly realised that life is too short and I'm going to live it now.
Don't Be Caught Dead, the show bringing stories of death back to life. Here's your host, Catherine Ashton.
So today I'm speaking with Kate Christie. Kate is Australia's leading time management expert, a speaker, best-selling and award-winning author of 5 books. Is that now 6, Kate, or is that still 5?
Yeah,
5 books.
Yeah.
And a sought-after media commentator. Kate is highly regarded for her dynamic, engaging, and entertaining presentations where she educates audiences on the right strategies and habits to ensure you find and harness hours of lost time and then plan for and deliberately use that time to live a life by design. And having seen Kate present earlier this year, I can definitely testify that it is exceptionally engaging, your presentation. But I will continue on your bio. So, as a leading voice on productivity, goal setting, and designing your best life, Kate consults to organisations of all sizes and compositions across every industry you can imagine. As a media commentator, Kate is an opinion columnist for CEO World Magazine and Mamma Mia. Works with Koshi's Business Builders and is regularly featured across television, radio, podcasts, and the print media. Kate is in the business of helping you find time, lots of time, and using that time well. Thank you so much for spending time with us today, Kate.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me onto your show, Catherine.
Now tell me, how and at what point did you realise time was a significant factor that you needed to focus on in your life?
Good question. I've never been asked that question actually in that way. Look, I think I was kind of born reasonably organised, but it was when I, had my children and was still trying to juggle a corporate career, time became more pressing. But it wasn't until my kids were sort of at school age and little, and the demands of trying to manage them with a sort of a senior executive role just became so challenging, to the point that I felt that I couldn't be a good mum and have an amazing career. And so I opted out of my amazing career. I couldn't get the kids back. And I think I felt that was my only choice, that I had to choose between the two things I loved most, my kids or my career. And it was after that, and having that time out from work and really missing work, but then understanding that I needed to start thinking about and doing time differently in order to have all the bits that I wanted. So that was probably that point, that of flex, where I thought I've got to do this differently. And what I guess I started doing was trying to educate myself. And I've always been pretty organized. So I was really just trying to get the cream on the top. And it turned into a business. It's sort of, my passion is to, really make sure that no one else ever feels that they have to choose between career and the rest of their life for want of time. And it was a choice that I'd had to make, and I don't want anyone else to have to make that choice. So that's sort of become my passion.
And it sounds like that there's also an element of guilt associated with that. Like that classic torn between family or career.
Oh, isn't guilt just our bread and butter, particularly as working women, I think, or mothers or carers? Guilt just plays such a significant role in our lives. And I don't think I ever really felt guilt until I became a mum. And guilt's not our friend. I guess I like to look at guilt these days as maybe a bit of a moral compass for me, that if I'm feeling overwhelmed by guilt, it's maybe giving me a nudge as to what sort of choices I need or want to be making. But, we've got to get rid of the guilt. No one's going to give you a gold star for being the guiltiest. And we have to kind of get over the guilt thing. I'm a little bit more tough love on the guilt thing these days. It doesn't do us any favors.
But I think that that's a really good point, that you have then gone through a process with obviously yourself, that you've reframed that and you've changed the way in which you've, sort of have it inform the actions that you now do. What are some of those other things? Because the classic that I love when I've read about you is, that cupcake, that moment when as a parent you realize that you have not quite ticked all the boxes that you thought you had ticked as the prize parent. And can you tell us a little bit about that moment for you?
Oh, look, I still have nightmares about that. So,
Sorry for bringing it up again.
Thank you for helping me relive my trauma.
Yeah.
Look, it was that classic, juggle. I was a senior executive at Telstra. I wanted to drop my little preppy at school. All the other parents seemed to be able to do it. And so I delayed my departure for work. I was dressed in my beautiful suit with my red lipstick on, and I literally had snot from the corner of my suit down my arm because it was cupcake day. And, I'd missed that memo. God knows where that was. And, this is back in the day when nothing was by app or by email. The note would have been at the bottom of the school bag underneath the squished banana. And there I was, I didn't have a cupcake in sight. My little boy was hysterical because everyone else had their cupcakes. And, I remember just sort of extricating him from me and giving him to the teacher and literally running or dashing to the car because I just felt guilt, this phenomenal, overwhelming sense of guilt that I wasn't doing anything particularly well. I wasn't being a great mum. I didn't feel like I was a particularly good executive. But when I was at work, I was thinking about the kids. When I was with the kids, I was thinking about work. I was constantly checking emails and taking phone calls when I was at home. And I remember, driving into the city that day, and I was crying, and because I just felt like such a goddamn failure as a mum. And I rang my own mum and said, I won't swear. I swear a lot, but I won't swear. But insert appropriate swear word here.
You're allowed to swear, Katie. It's fine. You're in safe company.
I'm a terrible potty mouth. I said to my mum, it's cupcake day. Who the hell comes up with these ideas? And I said, can you go to the supermarket and buy some cupcakes, put them on a paper plate, take them out of the plastic bag, bash them up a bit, take a bite, and take them down to school and make it look like we made them. And, literally all I could think of was like the 25 years of cupcake therapy my son was going to need, because they never remember all the good stuff you do. They just remember the shit. And I walked into my first meeting of the day, and I was a member of the senior executive. So I walked into the boardroom and everyone stopped talking. I was late, and they all looked at me, and they all then looked at their watch or watches, and they looked at me, and then they just started talking like nothing had happened. And I had this profound realization that I was the only member of that executive leadership team that didn't have a stay-at-home full-time wife. And I just thought, what the hell am I doing? I'm not doing any of this very well. And that was when I opted out. I thought I have to be a better mum. I can't do this.
So time became something you needed to tame then, and obviously rein back yourself. So how the hell did you start that?
Well, all of a sudden I had all this time on my hands, because I remember before I resigned, and I remember one of my kids saying to me something along the lines of, you're the only mum who doesn't come to sports day. All of the other mums are at sports day. And, they just pick up the nails and nail them into your heart. And shortly after I resigned, I remember it was the sports day. It was like a week later. I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be there. I'm going to be with all the other mums, none of whom I knew because I was never there. And my kids were in gym, and that was the red house. So I bought all this red stuff, and I, had made streamers, and I learnt the song. I still know the song. I could sing it to you now. And I rock up to school with the kids, And, sports day started at 9 a.m. and there I was. I was the only one there. The only one there for the whole day. And I'm singing the song and I've got the bloody streamers going. All of the other parents turned up at 3:15 and school finished at 3:30, and they turned up at 3:15 because that was when the relay races were. So when my kids had sort of said to me, "You're the only parent who doesn't come," they forgot to say, "For the last 15 minutes of sports day." And so, there I was. So all of a sudden, I actually genuinely did have a lot of time on my hands, which was wonderful, but I was also bored. My career, my brain, gave me a lot of self-worth. A lot of how I defined myself was around my expertise and that I was really good at my job and I loved it. And it was an integral part of my ego. And all of a sudden, all of that was gone. And I sort of thought, well, I need to do something else. I need to start a business but I needed to do that within the context of being able to prioritize my kids. So it had to be, I didn't want to go back and work for the man. I needed to design something for myself that I could use my beautiful brain, my intellectual property around the needs of my kids so that I could be there for the last 15 minutes of sports day, so I could go to the swimming carnivals, so I could do drop off and pick up and help out at the school and help out with homework and be there to talk to them when they got home from school, when they remembered their day, as opposed to arriving home at 7:00 when they couldn't remember their day. So I had to, be very intentional about what I designed to make sure that my kids remained front and center, because after all, that's why I'd left my job in the first place.
And so how do you do that, Kate?
Well, I started researching ideas for what my business could be. And I remember sort of, having all these really ace ideas. And oh my God, I remember one stage I had this idea. I thought, I'll start a wallpaper business where it's like stickers that you can stick to your kids' walls, and it could be like the height chart and flowers. And I thought, this is bloody brilliant. So then I look it up and there's already 8,000 other people doing that, So I kept having these amazing ideas, which everyone was already doing. So eventually I worked out, as you do, and as you did with your own business, that oftentimes our product or our service, our niche, is what we've done to solve a problem for ourselves or for people that we're close to. And you've come up with a solution to your own problem, and you start thinking about it and you think, other people must have this problem. Other people will need this solution that I have come up with for myself. And once you actually realize that and you tap into your intellectual property and your passion for helping other people, the product or the service is there. You just got to realize it.
And do you think that allowing yourself time to just, be curious, work out whether it was a wallpaper business that you wanted to do or not, but do you think that allowing yourself time to be curious, do you think that was one of the things that helped?
Yeah, look, it was a gift, partly I was exhausted, that whole sort of leaving work was pretty traumatic, and I was really tired. And, in retrospect, I look back now, I was probably, technically burnt out. I was exhausted. So that time was a gift, really, to recover and just to spend time with my kids. So it wasn't like I finished work and 3 minutes later I was researching wallpaper. It was a process. And I also recognized that it was a gift in the sense that it's not something everyone has the ability to tap into, to take some time out from work and to be curious and discover what it is you like. I'm very grateful for that. I don't undervalue the fact that it's not something that a lot of people can do or can afford to do. And I was very lucky to be able to do that. But yes, it certainly gave me time to work out what was most important to me and how could I best help other people.
But what's interesting is that from that experience, you seem to have then made it achievable for others that don't have to actually go through a traumatic experience or through a change of career, or but to actually embed some of these things that you've learnt along the way in a really bite-sized way. And I like when you talk about your goals as in, you know, the ones that you can do now, the ones that are a little bit bigger, and I'm not using the right terminology, Kate, please correct me. But the fact that, so it doesn't make it as scary when because when you think of time management, I do think of, like, the 80s shoulder pads and big hair. I am sorry, but it does come to mind. You do not represent that at all. But it is something that, time management, but you do make it seem really achievable. And I think what I like about it is that it's very goals based, like, and values based.
Yeah.
And do you think it comes back to that time, like when you had to really kind of work out what you wanted to do at your core?
Oh, without doubt. So when you sort of talk about the goals piece, that a lot of that comes from my fifth book, which is called The Life List. So I guess if you look at what I do linearly, I help people find time, or the time they need to then design and live their best life. So there's the time management piece. And once we get your time under control, we can move to a place of, what do you want to do with your time? What are your goals? How can we then implement those? And even in answering the question that way, you can see that my brain is, I think in terms of frameworks and processes. I trained as a lawyer. I think, I've always been one for lists and checklists. It's just the way my brain works. And what I've discovered over time in terms of coaching thousands of people around their time management and thousands of people around goal setting and creating a life list is that other people benefit from that linear kind of process-driven approach to how to invest your time differently, how to create a life list, now how to live your best life. And it becomes bite-sized, as you said. Step one's do this, step two's do this, step three's do this. Voila, you've got it. And it's just the way my brain works, but I've found that it's helped a lot of other people. It certainly has helped me teach other people to do what I know. And it then gives them the framework to then do it on their own once I've gone. Once I've exited the picture, they then have that framework. And each of my books are framework driven. So if you could pick up any one of my books and you probably say, oh, Kate's written this, because here's the framework, here are the steps, go do the steps, and you'll get the prize at the end. And that's just the way it works. It's that simplification and removing the complexity. But it definitely comes back to that values-based life. And oftentimes, if you pick up a self-help book, Catherine, every self-help book you ever buy is going to ask you what your values are. And that's great. And I think that's of value. But I think when it comes to time and time management, and when it comes to goal setting and designing your best life, we're asking the wrong question. We shouldn't be saying, what are your values? We should be saying, what do you most value? What are your values is a question around, what dictates your behavior? Well, honesty, integrity, service, your values dictate your behavior every day. The question I want your listeners to ask themselves is, what do I most value? That's a time-based question. That's really, where do you want to spend your time? Not how do you want to go about your day, but where do you want to spend your day? And once we understand exactly what it is we most value, time becomes really simple to manage, or as I talk about time, to invest. Because you only want to be investing in what it is you most value. And once you understand what you most value, then you can design and build your life and your future goals around that very limited, cup or bucket of things that you most value. And half the time we don't spend the time trying to work that out. And so we're chasing lots and lots of stuff. And your day is like, being in a paintball derby and you're just shooting off pellets left, right, and center. If we just step back and take a little bit of time to think about, what do I most value? that will give you laser-like focus on where you need to invest your time. It's as simple as that.
And when you ask people to focus on what they most value, do you find the list is long or short?
It's short. Mm. And some people will intuitively know what it is. Some people will say, well, it's my kids, or it's my kids and it's my career, or it's making bread and sewing and running marathons and my family. Most people will intuitively have the answer like that. But if you don't, then there's 3 questions that I get my clients to ask themselves to give them a good idea of what it is they most value. The first question is, if you were really sick, what would you get out of bed for? And you can write down a list of the things. And I don't mean the logistical things like the doctor and the Panadol. I mean, who would you get out of bed for? What would you get out of bed for? The second question is, when you're with your best friends in the world, those people who just lift you up, what do you love talking about? You're going to write down a list of answers to that. And then the third question is, if you think about that person in your life that you most value, that you hold in the highest regard, if they were, or when they are complimenting you, or if they were to compliment you, what would you love them to say about you? And you write a list of answers to that. And you go through those 3 lists and put a red circle around anything that comes up 3 times. And that's going to give you a very, very good indication of what it is you most value. So for mine, there are 3 things only. Now, you might have 5, you might have 10, you might have 20. I've got 3. My kids and my family. I love talking about them. I'll get out of bed for them if I'm sick. And the person I hold in highest regard is my father. And when he says to me, Katie, you're an incredible mum, you're an amazing partner, or you're an amazing daughter, that's just like nectar for my soul. The second thing is my business. I love talking about it. I'll get out of bed for it. And I love to be complimented on it. And the third thing is my health and well-being. Again, I'm with my besties. We're talking about planning hikes. We're saying, which spa are we going to go and try? How much are you sleeping? Have you stopped drinking? Are you running? Are you surfing? That's what I then build my life around. My family, my business, and my health and well-being. That's it. Everything else becomes a very, very simple no, because it's not what I most value, and I'm not prepared to invest my time in anything that I don't value.
And what do you find when you work with your clients? Are those challenges around that? Is it identifying what they value most, or is it putting it into practice, the framework that you lay out?
People can very easily identify what they most value. Very easily. Sometimes it can be confronting, because people then start to sort of say, well, I love my kids, but I prefer my job. I've got so many clients who say that to me, and then they feel guilty. And it's like, well, no, it just is what it is. It doesn't mean you have to, we're not doing a popularity contest here. We're just trying to get an understanding of what it is you most value. Other times there will be people who do that exercise and they realize they don't actually value their job or their business at all, and they hate it. And it's like, well, what the hell are you doing then? Because you're spending the vast majority of your time doing something that you don't value the most. So it can be a moment of reckoning for them. So the identification of what you most value is quite easy for my clients. It's the restructuring then of their life and their time to make sure that they're actually investing their time in the things that they most value. So it's that divesting yourself of all the other kind of crap that you're invested in. It's the guilt, it's the judgment of your family or the people around you who say, well, why aren't you going after that big, massive, amazing job that you've trained for? And why have you resigned to go around Australia for a year with your children? And so there's that external kind of judgment and pressure that then becomes the thing that people then have to grapple with.
And it's interesting because when you talk, I love the fact that you're focusing on your life list, because traditionally and contemporary wise, a lot of people refer to it as your bucket list, but I love the fact that you refer to it as your life list. Can you explain to me why you've made that deliberate, conscious, choice of words?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that, a bucket list is a list of things we want to do before we die. And it often just involves travel and adventure. Last year on my life list, one of the things I've wanted to do is travel first class. And I haven't quite got there yet, but I'm saving points. But last year I flew business class for the first time ever because it was on my list. And it kind of proved this point to me that a bucket list is a list of things you want to do before you die, because I was almost the youngest person in business class. There were 4 people brought onto that business class flight in wheelchairs. 2 of them
Oh, wow.
because they were very, very old, and 2 of them because they clearly looked like they were terminally ill or incredibly ill. I don't want to wait to do all the things that I want to do until I'm almost dead. I want to. We're asking the wrong question of ourselves with a bucket list. A bucket list question is, what do I want to do before I die? A life list question is, what do I want to do while I'm still young enough to enjoy it? What do I want to prioritize today? And it doesn't have to be, flying business class. It might be, I've got lots of stuff on my life list that don't involve spending money at all. It's spending more time with my kids, telling them I love them every single day, even when they're shitting me. It's decluttering the house. It's making a will. It's understanding my finances. It's, building a community of awesome midlife women who want to create their next chapter. None of that requires a financial investment by me, but it's stuff I want to do now. The other thing, I guess, is with the bucket list, as I said earlier, it's often around travel and adventure. People talk about their bucket list. They want to jump out of a plane, or they want to go swimming with sharks, and shit that's going to hasten your death. And I think that a life list is more than that. It's about the relationships I want, my health, my well-being. It's about getting my will in order. It's about making sure I've got a medical power of attorney in place. It's about making sure my kids know where my financial documents are in case I get hit by a bus.
It's so funny that you say that, because when we traveled overseas a few years ago, we went through the process of making sure that we had all of those documents in place. But there was something almost liberating in actually doing that, and sort of saying, okay, well, I've done my adult responsibilities. This is good,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, it's getting your house in order.
yeah.
And it's important that we invest time in this stuff. So I was really deliberate about it being a life list and not a bucket list. And as you know, Catherine, the book really was prompted by the fact that I lost my ex-husband. My children lost their dad to pancreatic cancer when he was only 54. He was diagnosed and passed away within 11 months. And he was a phenomenally charismatic character who was kind of bigger than life. He would walk into the room and, everyone knew he was there. And for someone like him to be struck down like that so quickly at such a young age, it was catastrophic. And it was a huge awakening for me. It's people sort of say, well, life's too short. And it's so trite. And I used to say, oh, life's too short, I'll eat a donut. Or life's too short and I'll stay in bed all day. But all of a sudden, I very tangibly and profoundly realized that life is too short. And I'm going to live it now. And that was kind of his final gift to me, was this absolute slap across the face, this awakening that I honestly cannot afford to fuck around. I want to live it now. I want a life list. What am I going to do now? One of the final things he said to me was his regrets that he hadn't prioritized the kids and experiences with the kids. And after he passed away, we had a meeting with the executors of the estate, and they said that he had left a sum of money to one side, and that he wanted me to take the kids on a holiday to anywhere in the world. And it was to be the holiday that he wished he'd had with his kids, that he wished he'd prioritized, but that he'd left too late. And that was gut-wrenching. Like, I still haven't gotten over that. My kids will never get over it. And that's why it's not a bucket list, Catherine. It's a life list. And my key message is, we've all got sad stuff, right? We've all got sad stories. Everyone's had trauma. Everyone's had loss. Everyone has a sad story. But I want, I guess, people to use my sad story as the impetus that they might need to say, hey, listen, I'm actually going to live a bit differently from now on. Don't wait for someone to die, or for some trauma to occur or some tragedy to occur to snap you out of whatever malaise we're living in. We can't afford to put stuff off until later, because later might be too late.
And do you see that play out when you work with clients? Do you hear those stories of regrets when there hasn't been an opportunity to perhaps patch up an estrangement? Or
I think, having written the book, what's really struck me is, because it's obviously there's a lot of me in the book, and in the past with my books it's been more kind of a business book. Do A, you'll get B, do C, you'll get D. Whereas this one obviously has the frameworks in it for how to create your own life list and then how to make that life list happen. So it's got all the practical stuff, but the start of the book is my loss and my kids' loss and the trauma of losing Dan, and how that sort of changed our world so much. What's really struck me, because I'm a very personal person, prior to this, no one would have known anything about me. So sharing that sort of vulnerability, what it has led to is so many people now write to me and share their stories of loss, or their stories of sadness or of tragedy, and it could be anything from losing a partner to losing a parent to, discovering an addiction in the family, to something awful has happened to them. And they then say, well, thank you so much for your book, because it's going to help me live differently. And I guess that's been a real gift for me, is realizing that if you're vulnerable, it allows other people, gives other people permission to start sharing their stories. And that's been amazing. And I feel very privileged, actually. I have people writing to me from all around the world, sharing with me their stories. And that's a real honor.
I totally agree with you. Just in my limited experience of just being with the podcast and people knowing that what I do in relation to, death literacy, and there is not an occasion I go to where someone doesn't come up to me and tell me a personal story. It is a great leveler, because you can be, anyone in that room, you can have any qualification, earn any amount of money, but it is the thing that actually unites us all. It's the one inevitable thing that we will all experience. And when we do experience, it is very human and it's very vulnerable.
Yeah, it is. And you would know this, as I do now, is that we then sort of become the caretakers of those stories. And that's really important. So just recently, actually, I've had a lot of people reaching out to me. So I've started to include some of their stories in my newsletter each month, because I want to honor their stories. Not everyone's going to write a book, but they've all got a story to tell.
It is. And there's something about that collective experience as well. I don't know whether you're a Nick Cave fan, haven't got to that aspect of the book yet, but he has certainly talked about it. And there's a very popular recent interview that he did with Lee Sales on the ABC, and he was speaking about the Red Hand files, which he really started as a response for sort of publishing on a newsletter the questions that he gets in fan mail around the death of his two sons and the grief that both he and his wife Susie have experienced during that time. And there's something about when that is shared collectively that is super powerful.
Yeah, I think it's very, very, very powerful. It's traumatizing. Like, I can't tell you how many times I open up my inbox and there's a story from someone, and I'll be in floods of tears. But it's brave, that sharing. When Nick or others share like that, it's phenomenally brave. I think it's the bravest thing you can do, is to talk openly about your grief and your loss.
And how do you carve out that time? You know, because as you said, that this book is very different to the other books that you've written.
Mhm.
So this must be a new element for you to, you know, navigate. And it
Mm.
certainly wouldn't have been written in this book because obviously it's just actually come out since it's been published. So how are you navigating that? How are you making sure that you're taking care of yourself now that you are sort of the confidant of many people now across the world?
Mm. Look, I guess I just honor what they're doing. So I make sure I respond to every single email I get, every text I get, every DM I get.
Every podcast request, thank you
Yeah,
very much.
every podcast request. Because it makes me feel like I'm helping other people. And I think when you're helping other people and there's that sort of sense of service, and you know this with what you do, Catherine, it's that can be sort of therapy and life affirming in itself. But the other sort of perhaps trite answer to it is because I've so got my time under control. Um,
Thank you. Yep. I'm sure your
I
publisher will be happy with that response.
yeah. I have the time to look after myself. You know, I spend a lot of time down the coast at my beach house. My ex-husband's ashes are down in the cemetery here. So I just actually today went for a walk and said hello and told him what was happening with the kids and had a bit of a cry. And I'll go to the beach. I've taken up surfing. That was on my life list of things that I wanted to do in my 50s was learn to surf. So I've got my kids gave me a surfboard for Christmas. So I've got my surfboard in the car and I go and have a surf. I make sure I have a massage most weeks. You know, I'm pretty, you know, it's as you know, it's one of the things that I invest in, my kids, my health and my well-being and my business. So, you know, I do look after my health and well-being. Mm.
And what are some of the little hints that you can share with us? How people can, you know, really prioritize the things that they value.
I think that firstly you need to understand what those things are. So I would do that little exercise on the back of an envelope and work out exactly what it is that you do most value. Once you know that, that's kind of your compass. That's your northern star that you can look to every single day. The other thing I would say is stop thinking about your time as something that needs to be managed. We can't manage time. We've all got exactly the same amount of it, and we can't buy more, steal more, rewind it, fast forward it, play it back. So we need to change the narrative. We need to start thinking about time as something that needs to be invested, and it needs to be invested for the greatest return, like your money. You've got a limited amount of it, but it's very, very precious, and you need to invest it where it's going to reap the greatest rewards and give you the greatest return, which again is in those things that you most value. So, you know, the simplest things that your listeners can do and start doing today is switch their mindset and start thinking about time as an investment. They wake up in the morning, where am I investing my time today? What's the next thing I'm going to invest in? Where am I going to get the biggest bang for my buck? And then, you know, focus on those things that they most value and pick up a pen and start writing out their life list. What are all the things that they want to do right now or within the next year or two that will align with those things that they most value? And, you know, so there's some of the simplest things that they can start doing and start prioritizing themselves. One of the big things I talk about different types of goals in the life list. I talk about go big goals, go small goals, and go now goals. And the go big ones are obviously the big, juicy, multifaceted, you know, I'm going to climb a mountain, I'm going to plant 1,000,000 trees kind of goals. The go small goals are the smaller goals that we can implement on a monthly basis that kind of keeps our cup full whilst we're building up those big goals. And the go now goals are, you know, just being open to acts of spontaneity. And one of my go big goals this year was to sort of grow my social media. I'm not very tech savvy. And so I got one of my daughter's friends. I approached her. She's this fantastic young woman, early 20s, who's in marketing, and I said she was just starting out her own business after having worked at a company. And I said, look, I didn't know her, I just, you know, knew her through my daughter. And so we met at a cafe and she put together this PowerPoint presentation, and she's like 23 and she was just nailing it. And she sort of got halfway through and I said, I want it. And she goes, look, we could do the monthly thing or we could do an annual package. I said, I want the annual package. She goes, I haven't finished my pitch. And I said, no, it's sold. She goes, oh, you're my first client. And I've been working with her for a couple of months, and my Instagram account's going gangbusters under the stewardship of this young woman. So, you know, I'm investing my time in the stuff that really gives me joy, Catherine.
I think we should all do that though, Kate.
It's not that hard. It's just about working out what it is you most value, investing your time for the greatest return, and doing it now, not later.
Kate Christie, I think that is a beautiful way to end our little chat today. Thank you so much for investing some time in us and spending some time with us this afternoon.
It was an absolute pleasure, Catherine. Thank you for having me.
Don't be caught dead forgetting to subscribe. And here are some more videos we know you'll love.